Happy Thursday, everyone. We're so excited to be back, and I hope you're doing well wherever in the world you're joining us today, whether you're watching us now live or whether you'll be watching in the future. I hope you're okay. And if this is your first time here, we're NoCodeOps by Zapier, an international community for operations professionals who leverage the power of no code and automation at work. My name's Claudia, community specialist at Zapier, and I will be your host. So I spent most of my 2024 raising awareness around the role of operations and its importance within a business. And so I'm really excited to be kicking off the new year talking about what it seems to be the fastest growing career in the US, revenue operations. But in order for me to do that, I've obviously had to invite experts from that field. And with that in mind, I'm really, really excited and super honored to be kicking off our series of live streams with our first guest, Nick Wavereck, RevOps at Xano. So I'm going to put him in. Hi, Nick.
Hey, Claudia.
How are you today? You're my first guest. I'm so happy to have you here.
I'm doing well. I'm both really excited and terrified to be on here right now, but it feels good to be going into 2025 with you know new plans, and I've got I'm in a new role, and I'm able to kind of meld these worlds of no code and visual development operations with RevOps, which is kind of been a fun part of our weekly RevOps roundtable discussions that if you guys aren't already a part of, or if you are you know genuinely interested in RevOps and no code, join us in the no code Discord meeting every what
Every
Friday,
other Thursday, every other
every other
Thursday.
Thursday. Yep, Thursday.
Yeah, and just, FYI to the audience, this was an unsolicited plug. So thank you so much. Thank you, Nick. Absolutely love the shout out to our community, which of course I can see a few people here in the chat from the community. So shout out to Eric watching us right now. And speaking of the chat, I always like to say that we like to keep our events as interactive as possible. This is your opportunity to interact with experts from the field. So please do use the chat, share comments, and interact with us as much as you can. So, Nick, before we get into the nitty gritty of today's topic, which is going to be obviously New Year Smarter Ops, very, very excited about that. I would like to know a little bit more about you and your journey. So, you work at Xano as a revenue operations professional. Congratulations on the new role. But how did you get into this industry? How did you get into automation operations? How did you mix and match the two things?
Mm. Well, I think as much as the maybe career role has defined itself over time, I think a lot of the professionals that are in the space have also kind of melded their experiences. So mine's probably not any different than a lot of other RevOps professionals, which is just I was in sales. I was in a quota carrying, sales rep, and doing enterprise selling, as well as worked inside marketing organizations. Worked inside the tools that we were using from a sales and marketing perspective, and as we kind of see that shift into continuous impact driving continuous revenue. The customer service and retention side of the companies that I worked for became really important. Some of the um, you know retention on the user space, so things like metrics like trial to pay and 90-day retention and upsell and cross sell and expansion really became like core to what I cared about deeply and could then impact other teams. And then that's where I kind of stumbled into what is now RevOps, which is really just the science of scalable revenue, and the systems, processes, and people that go into them. So,
Yeah, I think impact is the key word there. And I don't know if you remember your own definition of RevOps. So in a few roundtables that we had, a few weeks ago, actually, I think it was before Christmas, you gave us your own definition of RevOps, something like mad scientists that generate revenue.
The mad science of making money.
Mad
Uh,
scientists making money. Yes.
I mean, honestly, we have to spot things that are working or are not working. And it's not just about doing more with less. And it's not just about, um, you know, finding things that are going to scale. It's about finding those things that are ultimately going to lead to that recurring impact.
Yeah, brilliant. I was just reading the chat. I can see hi Ty and Donovan in the chat as well. Love this quote, the science of scalable revenue. Absolutely. And mad scientists making money. Yes, guys, that's going to be the title of our whole series. Our whole set of events is going to be about inviting mad scientists like Nick making money at important companies. So, Nick, should we get started?
Sure. Yeah.
Let's
Um,
let's get in.
well, when you invited me today, it's kind of a subtopic of maybe even like what a lot of RevOps professionals are focused on, but it spans beyond RevOps, right? It spans into other operating principles and mindsets as well, and it really comes down to um, bottlenecks.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know. Can I share my screen or you got this? All right,
There
perfect.
it is.
Um, and this is this is actually a picture off of Zapier's website. Again, unsolicited plug. But Zapier has a great guide for RevOps professionals as well that just came out. And um, I thought this was a funny picture just because it came up in Google about image of bottlenecks. Um, but as Claudia already said, I'm Nick. I live in Fargo. So good morning, good afternoon, or evening, whatever time of the day it is, wherever you're at. Um, Thanks for joining in, and thanks in advance for choosing to stay all the way to the end, if possible. I'll try to end with some sort of level of exciting surprise. For the past 15 years, I kind of had that opportunity to serve different SaaS companies in different roles. And this is really the best way that I've ever been able to like overlay 4 different pains. Uh, but I think it was important for me to kind of figure out as I career progress, like, how do I find something that is truly an overlap of strategy, technology, operations, and can have a creative outlet to it, and that's problem solving component that I think I um, align to. And so I'm extremely excited to be now kind of like bringing all that together inside this specifically RevOps focused role at Xano, which, you know, I get to work with some really, really cool people, really smart people. And as we bring the back end scalability to visual development and the no code ecosystem.
Shout out to a
Um,
few friends at Xano, Liz, Chris, and all the friends.
I love listeners. So today, specifically, I kind of wanted to chat through like identifying bottlenecks, um, some different methods to kind of like zero in on where the bottlenecks are really out within your process or your system, um, and then ultimately kind of talk through, you know, what a proactive or a shift to a proactive mindset and culture around like handling or identifying bottlenecks looks like versus just purely reactive. And then maybe a monkey. So, what is a bottleneck? And like, why should we care about it? Um, I think the most important thing to remember is that often, especially in the RevOps lens, our conversion rates are exponential. They have exponential impact to each other. And so when we think about things like our time metrics or our volume metrics, um, one small increase or decrease or gap in our volume metric, because some throughput might not be happening, um, or we have a spike in traffic, that we can't handle, all of a sudden, if we're not able to process those and our throughput goes down, our conversion rate through all the way into revenue and retention can either be massively impacted, positive or negative. But what the heck is a bottleneck? It's not what you, as much as it sounds like it might be like some insult from the 80s. And it probably was. I'm not talking about cotton-headed ninny pigs or whatever the words are from the 80s, but I'm talking about a point of congestion within your system or your workflow or your process that ultimately creates that backlog.
Let us know in the chat if you've ever experienced an example of a good bottleneck, because I'm sure that especially our audience here today, I'm sure we can get one or two quite interesting experiences or use cases. Just let us know in the chat. Maybe share your worst case of a good bottleneck.
Well, and I don't know if I can see the chat, but if you share them in there, we'll take a peek whenever they're
we'll put them in.
Another good example of a bottleneck, it's ski season, and I think the folks out in Park City, Utah, know pretty well what a bottleneck looks like. The lines were backed up all the way down. People were hiking up the mountain instead of taking the lifts. That just goes to show that bottlenecks can be both short-term and long-term. And I think in long-term, we often think maybe that's associated to like physical systems, like a really large, expensive piece of manufacturing equipment or like a production line or something like that. And we have something that takes a long time to fix versus like a short-term that might just be tied to you launched a website, you launch a new product, or you launched a digital campaign and it had a massive response. Think through like how many people scanned the QR code of the Coinbase Super Bowl ad, however many years ago, 3 years ago, maybe, or whatever it was, had whatever, QR reader not been able to handle the throughput. That could have been a bottleneck for them, even though people were doing what they wanted them to do. In NoCodeOps or in RevOps, often we think about maybe the bottlenecks that we deal with the most are tied to limitations or maybe potential outages in the tools that we use. But just like in any streamlined system, bottlenecks can come from the technology layer, the process layer, or the people layer. Winning by Design, or this is actually a book, an image from the book Revenue Architecture, which is crafted by the brilliant minds at Winning by Design. If you haven't, and you're in RevOps, I really suggest that you either get the audio book or download the book. The physical book is like I don't even know. It doesn't make sense to ship that via Amazon. It's huge.
What's it called again, Nick? I'll look it up so that I can share it in the chat.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Revenue Architecture. And then you can share your Amazon affiliate link and then
I wish I had one, but sure.
Yeah, but if you haven't, please read it. It's really awesome. It really talks about this fundamental shift in revenue operations, as revenue as a factory. And we think about throughput of a factory, and we think about the inputs and the processes that we have within a factory. And we've gone through these different revolutions, industrialized revolutions, and we're currently kind of in this chasm of like, with agentic workflow and the really employing agents that perhaps what we're looking at right here, which is really a definition of like a bottleneck that might include like it can show an over reliance on a single person. While that might, be a bottleneck, it also kind of shows the burden that like high performing individuals can have and be left carrying. Um, and that kind of leads to major burnout risk. Um, but as we enter into this, fourth industrial revolution, leveraging AI, um, and you know, machine learning and systematic automation, not just manufacturing automation, things like that, but do we actually, maybe even have a multiplex of these superstar humans being done by agentic roles? Um, we're at the,
That'd be interesting. Did you have the chance to experiment with a little bit of that AI agents in your
you
role?
know,
I know that
I
it's
think,
right now is the hype. They're everywhere on
yeah,
the
it's hype.
internet.
I
People,
mean, it's hype.
yeah,
Everything, no one is an expert in it. I mean, there's definitely been a lot of heavy use case.
mm,
And this is 2025 is probably the year that agents take their foothold out of internship and into employment.
right.
Um, I
Somebody
mean,
was talking about the death of the internet, where we're just going to have AI agents, basically AI, yeah, agents speaking to one another, and I don't know where we're gonna be. Hopefully on, snowboarding somewhere in Fargo.
well, I think that you know context and um, action kind of drive that continuous loop of enabling agents, or maybe even like enable sending them in their either positive or negative direction. um, and I think the more that we provide context and
Mhm.
documentation, the more we can actually leverage agents
Documentation is so
within our
important.
process. Documentation is huge, and that's actually kind of that's the shift here from like having that people centric approach of just like you you're solely reliant on people first, and then you're laying technology on top of the people and systems and processes on top of that technology. Which, I mean, I come from a lot of early stage startups, which that's often the case. Like you end up having you do things that don't scale right away because you need to move quickly.
Mm.
But as you move out of prototyping land and product market fit land, and you start to figure out what is working, um, then you have to make what works start. You have to intentionally kind of slow down to speed up and make your systems and processes the foundation that you can wrap technology around, and then enable the people through tech enablement of using those tools. Um, and that is something that grows horizontally and actually becomes more stable. Um,
I love that you're talking about process and process mapping and that sort of shift, that mindset shift that people have to get into when approaching automation, or just like streamlining their ops, because that's so crucial, right? I've talked to a crazy amount of operations professionals last year, or, in the community, and to have that sort of click when you start mapping your processes even before you start approaching your build, that's where the magic really happens. That's when you can scale, when you have good documentation, a good process mapping. That's when you can go to your stakeholders and be like, hey, this is how we're going to go from zero to hero.
yeah, you're reading my mind. That's exactly what.
Mhm.
Um, that's what the one really great way to identify bottlenecks within your processes is have those uh, flows documented, right? Um, whether that's in the system of engagement and action that's happening, kind of like the way that Zapier Canvas works, um, or if it's in a system of design, like if you're documenting in Figma or Lucid or Miro or on a physical whiteboard. There's just too many ways to there's too many different ways to name out all the ways you can uh, sketch out a process. But having the documentation, and then again, then maybe even thinking back into the earlier topic of like enabling agents or enabling your team, um, making it so that is not just you know a flattened PDF that is tough to interpret, but the more structured from some sort of like schema and standardization within your documentation will enable context. So that way, even potentially an AI agent can follow your process. Think about it as like a really enriched prompt. Um, and it really doesn't matter where or how, as much as it really
Mm.
just as much as it actually happens.
Is it
Um,
possible to zoom in here?
oh, I
Don't worry
wish
if
I should
not.
have.
Don't worry
I
if
could have
not.
embedded this. This isn't a Miro doc.
All
Um,
right. It's just
but
an
I just
example of
want,
how you mapped your
yeah,
process. Right.
exactly. And this is actually an example of a real example of when I came into my current role, I
Mm-hmm.
would not have been able to absorb as much as I did, as quickly as I did, if it wasn't for the process modeling and the documentation that came before me. Um, and process documentation can quickly become gospel. It can become this is how it works, um, which isn't always the case, right? We can lean into the assumption that this is how it works because this is how it's documented. But it's important to keep in mind that it needs to stay living and tied to how things are actually working, especially if you have multiple cooks in the kitchen, and we potentially have changes that are happening in production systems. Keeping it correct and up to date is pretty important. Um, you know, as someone kind of comes into your organization, or uh, shifts onto a team that they need to learn and adapt to the process, being able to like see where they play as well as where other teams operate. And this is where RevOps kind of comes into play, where we're talking about that unlocking the overlap between our marketing, our sales, our customer success, and our product teams, on really kind of like finding the value in those in that Venn diagram, as
Mm-hmm.
well as enabling faster throughput throughout those. um, that's as soon as something new comes about,
Mm-hmm.
like this is a screenshot of the HubSpot quote approval uh, setting, because maybe that's a new great feature that sounds pretty neat and useful, and somebody can just turn it on. And what does that do to a potential to creating a backlog for either an individual, or a process that maybe wasn't fully documented, or process documentation wasn't updated. Um, and now we've created a potential uh, bottleneck by not keeping our documentation updated, or an assumption that we're not actually creating a bottleneck.
Nick, we have a few.
Oh, sure.
The chat is on fire with this topic of documentation, and lots of positive uh, comments of reinforcement on its importance. Um, so here, for example, Eric says it's so important to document not just for automation efforts, but continuity and onboarding. Um, Vera, hello Vera, she also says documentation is key, makes transition and scaling better. And then we have a question from Donovan. Do you document every ZAP step, for example, or just the basic flow? Seems redundant to document every step and easily gets outdated. That's an interesting one because I think it's more technical. It's more specific to how do you document automation. So I don't know if you would like to comment on that. Me personally, I try and do it. I use a tool called Tango, which records my screen step by step,
Hmm.
and I usually write down what each of my clicks are doing in plain English for my future self to understand. But yeah, I don't know, Nick, what would you say?
Yeah,
How
I
do you
mean,
document? I mean, you showed us
within
your mirror board as a process mapping. Do you use a similar tool for your automations, for example?
well, I think a lot of my automations are within, I'm very CRM centric in my role.
Mm,
A lot of my automations are happening inside of our HubSpot or CRM. But that said, the documentation itself often comes at a high level of what is that workflow doing. Um, and the other really nice thing about when you're documenting from the system of engagement as well, or the system of automation, is that basically the schema is already legible by the system. And so an AI and generated description of what this workflow is doing
mm,
is a lot easier to do. Um, that said, it's isolated to the system. Um, you don't necessarily need to have every single zap, but you need to understand the maybe the essence of inputs, outputs, and throughputs, and then kind of identifying those within a larger, you know, mapping of the processes that you have. So when we
mhm,
looked at that one earlier, there's so many um, there's so many processes that are happening here. Some of this is blueprinting, so that way we can go actually build the thing inside of the CRM or the cross system integration that we're operating. Um, and some of it is like designed to be reference for future. Um, but point is, think it, or dream it, think it, design it, build it, support it, keep it updated. Um,
your future self will be grateful. Trust me. And please name your automations. Like I'm sure, I don't know, guys, if you were to share your account details, which maybe I
oh
can, maybe
God.
I cannot look into, the amounts I can bet the amount of untitled automations that we
Untitled
have.
workflow. Yeah, exact.
Yeah,
Oh
yeah,
my
yeah.
goodness.
Oh, that's atrocious. So step number one, name your automations, please.
Mhm.
Good naming conventions never dies. We also have a question from Ty. What tips or tricks do you have to efficiently keep documentation up to date?
Yeah, I think, using it, referencing it, even inside of like, uh, in RevOps, I the ideal state in RevOps is that you're kind of working with the leaders within those different departments or groups on a regular basis and understanding the tweaks or changes or potential bottlenecks that you're addressing within those processes, and like using that as living breathing, you know having a separate portion of your documentation that's like, this is production and this stuff here is draft. So that way, like this is what our changes to our life cycle stages would look like, or this is what our changes to our webinar registration follow-up flow looks like
Mm,
now versus like what it looks like in the V next.
mm-hmm.
Um, and then once you've now you're planning and you're referencing in the same kind of documentation, but in separate spots, it's easier to like move one to the other. It's kind of like we don't have um, we don't have commenting in our code, or to the extent that you do when you're following a traditional, product development, or we don't have. I guess maybe maybe you could, you know, do some sort of um, change tracking to it
Yeah,
as well.
change log, yeah.
But but um, it still requires you to make the changes in order to get a
Yeah.
change log in.
Which maybe brings us to this other question from Eric. Who should own the job of creating and updating the automation? Is it a group effort or is it, just for management to look after?
Um, that's a good question. Some organizations, there's you know product product ownership of automations and integrations embedded within the teams. Some organizations, maybe if you're a little bit wider organization, you might even have like a specific operations department that owns integrations and automations. The team, that it impacts the most, or the stakeholders, definitely need to be involved in knowing the what and when, and why things are changing. Oh, sorry if you can hear my dog.
That's all right.
And then sometimes, the more, if that is centrally owned by a team or individuals, um, they're just bringing in those stakeholders, both in the teams and in management, to be aware of those potential changes. Like, oh, go ahead. There we go.
Yeah, so it's down a little bit to your organization structure a little bit as well. Maybe bigger organizations might have an automation doctor that tells you everything's fine or something broke. You need
I
to
like
have a
that.
look at that. Yeah, but I've also talked to many people that are just like a one woman or one man bands. So they'll have to create everything themselves and maintain it, and making sure
And
that.
in
But if you've got OCD, like most of us do, it's natural.
I think that that's probably the most challenging case that I've been in, is being like completely the single point of everything, when it comes to integration and automation, because it's very easy to slip into, oh, that's a small change, I'll just make that change now, and then I'll update,
Mm,
how it works later. And those little changes compile, and they ultimately like lead into, a, a next version of whatever you built.
yeah,
It's not just an update.
yeah.
Um,
Remember, Bill Gates used to say, automation applied to an inefficient operation will just magnify the inefficiency. So basically, if you automate chaos, you're just going to get chaos faster and multiplied. So don't do that.
yes, we'll get to chaos in a little bit. Uh,
Nice. I'll let you. I'll let you continue.
no, nope, no. And if there's more questions, yeah, bring them up. That's awesome. Um, Another way to kind of reactively identify, bottlenecks specifically, or kind of, is through root cause analysis, right? The Japanese, I don't even know the word for it, but a fishbone diagram that probably people are oh, this is a Figma template that you can just freely use. There's another Figma template for, um, the 5 whys as well. 5 whys as
Hmm.
well. This one, just kind of outlays the contributing factors and helps you like kind of come together as a team to try and understand what factors are contributing to a potential problem, or um, kind of a root cause. The 5 whys, sometimes much easier and simpler, and other times it is harder, because you start at the why, and then they kind of compound upon each other by asking, going deeper of why. Well, why is that? Why is that? And if you start to, start to fork off into, well, it could be this or it could be that, then you go from 5 whys to, you know 12 whys and all that kind of stuff. So, you just kind of have to think principles first, or first principles type thinking, when you're going down a 5 whys exercise. Um, the example we saw earlier of the skiers.
Hmm.
Um, why did they? Why why are they in line, or why are they backed up? And it might go all the way down to, well, we didn't have controls in place to, you know limit our ticket sales. It So why didn't, why in between? Well, they were able to buy tickets, they were able to, check in, all those different things might come down to the fact that they just didn't have limiting factors for their ticket sales.
Hmm.
And should they? It's just, is that a short-term bottleneck? I don't know. But moving from diagnosing bottlenecks and identifying them and into um, a strategic shift and a mindset shift into proactive approach. I think one key area that we can maybe we'll just talk a little bit about, because I know we're running up on time a little bit, but what if we knew about bottlenecks before they happen? And how can we, as operators, lean into areas that happen in other areas of business or product development, like continuous improvement and continuous development, um, to better understand bottlenecks within our processes or systems. Um, and that's where the chaos monkey comes in. The chaos monkey um, is a popular kind of open source tool that was developed by Netflix, ultimately to implement organized and scaled chaos, and
Uh-huh.
chaos engineering principles within their distributed systems in AWS. Um, and it was designed to just randomly kill their VMs, so their machines within their cloud infrastructure, and proactively kind of test out the resiliency of a system by simulating all these real world failures and disruptions. So not going crazy overboard, but going into like the harsh realities. And I think if we think about what our own chaos monkey might be like, just think about how could you disrupt yourself uh, if you were a white hat hacker, and you had access to your Zapier account or you had access to your CRM. How would you go about breaking stuff? How can you break stuff in your own system? And then what can you do about addressing the things that you could break that might create bottlenecks? Um, and then, ultimately, like, oh, I put this in here
Oh,
too.
I
I
know
remember,
that guy.
yeah, I know that guy. I remember the first time that I ever heard the words chaos monkey. It was back in 2017 spring. We were at a startup weekend event here in Fargo, and Wade, Zapier's CEO and founder, was up because we invited him to come speak at our event, and he was just hanging out in the crowd with everybody, going to all the different projects, going checking out stuff in Fargo. But I remember him having a conversation with a friend and coworker of mine, specifically. They were just nerding out about this Netflix Chaos Monkey project that just had gotten open source and updated in the fall of 2016, and um, it was new to me then, but it makes a lot of sense now, knowing that like the whole purpose of it being resilience testing and finding those weaknesses, creating that fault tolerance in those distributed systems, and ultimately, building confidence in your own processes and knowing that you have the stability. Um, so that's what, I think if you could create your own chaos monkey, or if you could disrupt your processes from within, what would your chaos monkey do? And I think
Hmm.
that's maybe a good question to leave it on,
That's
because I
a
know
good
we're,
segue to our Q&A.
yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you so much, Nick. That was brilliant. I love how we went from identifying the bottlenecks to then talking more about laying foundation about the crucial aspects of building a streamlined operation, such as documentation, process mapping, super important. And I love this concept of the chaos monkey. I have to admit, I this is the first time I hear of it, but it's something that I think we put in practice already at Zapier, because I know whenever we build an automation or a new system, we usually just ask our colleagues to go and break it, go and test it out, break it if you can. So I guess that would be a sort of my chaos monkey, the way that we do it.
Yeah, I mean the Netflix Chaos Monkey as like uh an actual like piece of technology or is
Hmm.
it literally is just like going into your infrastructure and like automatically killing things. But one of the principles behind it is it needs to be scheduled, it needs to be gradual, it ultimately needs to somewhat reflect real life changes that could happen, but also it it attacks your systems of redundancy and your own systems of testing as well. So that, because often we see systems breaking after their weakest point, not at their weakest point.
Hmm.
Their weakest point maybe created a fracture. And where the system breaks down is where, far beyond the fracture.
Yeah, absolutely. So people that are still watching, and I can see you're here, what would you do? Tell us, or actually, what would your chaos monkey do? Or is that something that you're already using? And with that question, I'm also going to officially open our Q&A. So I hope you have been enjoying our talk today. I'm sure you have. So if you do have any questions, this is your time to drop them in the chat. I'm also going to go through our registration, because we do have a few questions that have been submitted previously. So are you ready, Nick?
Yeah, sure.
Awesome. I should have checked if you had a glass of water or something with you. I usually do that.
A little bit more
Oh,
coffee.
awesome. All right. Let me see. Let me see what we have here. Got some AI agents questions. Okay, this one is interesting. From Pega. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Pega. Tips on staying flexible in GTM strategy without crossing into indecisiveness.
Um,
How do you stay flexible in GTM?
I think you have to remember that GTM efficiency is about finding what works and doing more of what works and doing less of what isn't working. Um, and that comes down to having data model and a math model. And again, this is winning by design, revenue architecture concepts, but having these different models laid on top of each other so that you can, once you start tracking the information in a standardized way, you can apply that from one go-to-market motion to another. And that's that whole like idea of having you have time metrics and volume metrics, and you have conversion rates, and you have a conversion rate somewhere in the middle of your bow tie funnel or your bow tie model, which, you know,
Tell us
for
more
most.
about the bow tie model.
Okay,
What,
yeah, I
what's a
figured
bow
we're
tie
gonna get
model?
the a bottleneck and a funnel kind of look the same, right? Like a bottleneck is just kind of like a funnel on its side. Um,
Mm,
think about a bow tie as more of like an hourglass
right.
on its side. Um, a bow tie really leans into the recurring impact, driving recurring revenue, and the growth and expansion of your recurring revenue over time. So that's not going to apply to every single business in the world because not every single business has recurring customers. If you're selling, if you're selling a house um, to, or you're selling houses, you probably aren't going to sell that house to the same customer over and over again. Um, but if you do have a recurring revenue model or a consumption based revenue model where there's recurring spend and recurring impact, you have to really lean into the fact that your go to market model kind of stops at that commit and your revenue retention and expansion model takes over. And retention, a retention rate of 100% versus 90%, um, from a math model perspective, has you know far more impact on
Hmm.
lifetime revenue um, than something like a close rate of that sale, or the total average deal size. Um,
Right.
so, anyways, the segue to the question was like, um, how do
How
you
do you
make
keep it
changes to
flexible?
yeah,
Yeah.
how do you stay flexible? And I think it's standardization breeds innovation and breeds the opportunity to innovate, and try new things. And then specifically in finding go to market fit, you have this intentional experimentation, and where we are baselining what model is what go to market motion is working, or what go to market motions are in play. And we know that we are either increasing revenues with that, or potentially it's not working. And those oscillations between working and not working, as we switch between go to market motions, allow us to baseline and figure out what's actually working most effectively without with tightening our
Without
oscillation patterns.
interfering. Yeah.
Yeah, and then that's when we go into this growth and scale phase of like doing things that are working at scale. Um, so you have to be flexible.
Hmm. Yeah, going back to your chaos monkey, Donovan says sometimes I add an emoji to a text to see if he breaks a step. That's his monkey. Do you, Donovan? Do you add a monkey emoji? That's my own personal question. um, Great. As we're coming up to time almost, I've got an interesting question here that kind of wraps up everything that we've been talking about. We have Mayank, again, hope I'm pronouncing it right, who's just starting a new role in RevOps. So they were saying, looking forward to learn more. So I guess this question could be something like, to anyone who's just starting out in RevOps, right? Is there any piece of advice that you would like to give to them?
Yeah, that's a
Quit now.
I you know, I
No,
I
don't
think
do it.
that the uh the um the network effect, the amount of people that you can interact with, they that will multiplex the amount of content and learning opportunities. Um, and the I think a really another important thing to keep in mind is that we often tend to think that like, oh, we're special, or we do things different. Um, and I worked at an ag tech company, that worked in the grain industry. We thought we were different, and one of the biggest things was like, no, we're not. We literally just create something that that people use to create a better version of themselves, and that's that user onboarding kind of like diagram of like, you are the flower, you're
Mm,
not the superhero. You turn the customer into the super, or no, you're not the feather. You're not Super Mario flying. The customer becomes Super Mario. So I think that just that mindset of like, we don't have to do things differently. You don't have to recreate the wheel. You can, through standardization, create innovation. And if you haven't really lean into the revenue factory model or the revenue architecture concepts, um, it it's I think that also enables standardization across the industry too, so that creates a lot of opportunity.
from zero to flower, says Donovan. I love
Gotta
that.
use the emoji.
Absolutely. Um, and that's great. And I also think that to all those ops people that I've talked to last year, I feel like revenue operations is finally your chance to show your impact. Because one of the biggest pain points from ops people, at least that they've confessed to me was that they were never able to track their impact, or it was a little bit hard for them to do so within the company. And so I feel like revenue operations is really what's hitting the nail right now. It's like, okay, but look, this is what you're actually bringing to your organization, and that's tangible. That's, you can track that, you can show that, and that's definitely something that you can now see a light at the end of the tunnel to all my ops people out there. um, oh, hi Jean. Last
Yeah, I
question from
think.
Ty,
Oh,
or unless you wanted to add something there, Nick, by all
yeah, I
means.
think. I mean, there's definitely. I think I've seen it broken down into maturity models for revenue operations as well, um, and really kind of leaning in and focusing on that foundations of making sure that you have the data, that it is working, and can really be kind of a data operator, before leaning into like deep deep thinking strategic changes, that have to ultimately impact financial operations. um, Data, then turning data into KPIs, turning KPIs into forecasting into insight and unlocking different exponential growth opportunities, and you know then like kind of streamlining, once you kind of level up in that. But the revenue operations, kind of professional, just kind of serves that like whole process, organization, data, driving adoption and reporting, um, actionable insights, and then back into process improvement, right? So that's that flywheel that we kind of serve, while wear those different hats.
Hmm.
um,
Yeah. And one last question, Nick, before I let you go, from Ty. He says, crazy question. Are there times that you have left a bottleneck in place, allowing some friction for the sales team, acquisition funnel, or some other reason? So, yeah, have you left your bottleneck kind of happen for some reason?
uh, Yeah, I think sometimes you just do, because it's not worth it to fix it, especially um, if you're picking off, or you have a good process for like bubbling up, and like you don't need to. Sometimes people jump to unhealthy friction that can
Mm,
sometimes impact things later on. So think about like form management. So if you have a website form, and let's say you're selling to businesses, so you just want to, you make sure that they're part of a business. Well, if the way that you were determining that they're a business, potential prospect, is that they don't have a personal email address. Well, they're a human. They might be using a personal email address, even if they work at a business, to
mm.
download your piece of content. If you prevent people from using a personal email address to download.
Well, we'll never know what the downside to that might be. He's back.
Oh, did
There
I
you
did I
are.
go away?
That, yeah, you did for a brief second, but it was really great
Okay.
because it created a little bit of suspense. I was like, you'll
um,
never know.
did I say something about forms and
Yeah, so when you
okay.
prevent people from using their personal email address.
Yeah. You might be unintentionally putting your actual prospects and customers that are in your ICP,
Yeah,
um,
raising a barrier.
uh, you're just creating unhealthy friction. And so creating unhealthy or enabling healthy friction and disabling unhealthy friction is a primary role of RevOps. So yeah, we've done that. I've done that in the past where it's like we don't really care that like anybody, including your grandma, can download our piece of content. Um, when the right ICP with firmographic fit and behavioral, kind of scoring an indicator. Oh man, I think I died again.
No, you're good.
Okay. When that right fit happens, you can bubble that fit up, and eventually you can clean up all of the personal email addresses that you don't actually care about that aren't in your TAM.
Yeah, and sometimes it's true. It depends on what sort of account people are logged in when they hit on that download. Might not necessarily mean that they don't have a company email, so you might want to
Yeah.
work on
Facebook
some
ads are
engagement.
like
Yeah.
notorious for that, right? Like running ads on Facebook, earning lead ads on Facebook, and then you're getting a bunch of personal email addresses and you're trying to sell to businesses. Like it's hard. So you have to really kind of take the implied intent along with like they might be in your ICP and they're just, not using your primary indicator that you thought was your primary indicator.
And maybe that's a good prompt, a good idea for our next live stream about when do we act on our bottlenecks and when don't we act on our bottlenecks. Think about it, Nick. I might want to have you back. No, but jokes aside, this has been absolutely fantastic. Again, I was really, really excited to have you here as our first speaker into our live streams 2025, and I feel like you did a brilliant job. I hope you feel the same because I know how tense you were before we went live, and I think it went absolutely great. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise and knowledge with our community and overall, with the Zapier audience as well.
And if you're watching this live or recorded, like you should come to our RevOps hangout. I'm gonna plug that one more time. It's just a lot of fun. We even have like AI writing songs for us and stuff. So um, come to our roundtable discussions on Thursdays.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You've got a free link walking past just up there. So Nick, thank you so, so much. Again, have a fantastic day, and I guess I'll see you in the community.
All right, we'll see you guys. Thanks.
Bye everyone, take care. See you next time.